Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. This is going to be a different sort of episode. I sat down in my basement with my very good friend, Ed Uszynski, or Dr. Ed Uszynski, to debrief our recent Exiles in Babylon conference. We do this every year. Ed sticks around for an extra day, and we head down after an exhausting but exciting week, and we pull ourselves together, slam a bunch of coffee, and debrief the Exiles conference. So that's what this is. Ed Uszynski he's been on the podcast so many times, you probably know who he is, but he works for Athletes in Action, has a PhD in American Studies from Bowling Green University, and is a author of a forthcoming book, which I'm going to bring him back on the podcast to talk about. The forthcoming book is basically helping Christians understand critical race theory. Woo-hoo. Yes, he does go there, and it's a fantastic book. So we'll talk about that at a future episode. But in this episode, we're just going to kind of banter around and in real raw and authentic form, debriefing the recent Exiles in Babylon conference. So please welcome back to the show, the one and only Dr. Ed Uszynski. Oh, man. Day after Exiles. We are recording this Sunday. What's the date? April 21st.
It is the 21st.
April 21st. This is the day after what's supposed to be a 3-day conference, but it turns out to be, it ends up being 4 days of that. GenZ and then the pre-conference. I mean, it's a lot going on. Here's what other people, like speakers, start coming in Tuesday, Wednesday. So I'm hanging out with people. Extra dinners. So, I mean, I've been talking as an introvert, talking nonstop for 5 days straight.
You're shot.
I could probably hear it in my voice. I'm not sick. It's just my vocal cords.
Well, people listening to the podcast can't see how shot you look.
You just fried. I'm glad you got the memo to wear a maroon shirt as well.
Yeah, so. We got our post
our black sweats in my basement.
Post Exiles uniforms on.
All right, I'm here with my very good friend Ed Uszynski, who has spoken at Exiles and he's been here every year, right? Yeah, every year. Yeah. So I always ask Ed to come out either as a speaker or just as somebody just kind of around to kind of help me debrief, be in the green room,
eat pizza,
wings.
There's a lot of winging intake. Exiles 2024, a lot of wings.
A lot of birds went down this year. So yeah, I just asked Ed to come on and help me debrief the conference. I mean, this year, I don't know. I guess it was among the more intense, not intense like in a bad way, just like the topics. Each topic had a certain intensity, heaviness, emotional depth, in its own way. And they were fun. Like the speakers lots of laughs. I mean, it was
totally, but each of the topics just socially and out in the public arena are already laden with so much emotion and hostility and, violent rhetoric, certainly outside the church, but even inside the church.
Right.
All these topics really stir people up.
Yep. Yeah. Do you, where do you want to start, man? You want to go in chronological order?
Yeah. How about this? What are your feelings just 10,000 feet wise as you think about how this one felt overall compared to the first two? Things that were the same, things that felt different?
Other than feeling exhausted right now, but that's actually normal.
Yeah.
Interesting. I feel less as exhausted as I feel and felt yesterday. I felt more exhausted. I think after the first one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's new, but there's a certain unique energy.
When you're not sure what's going to happen. Right. And
I was more nervous, like in between each speaker, I'm just like, what am I doing again? What am I saying? What's going on? And this was a little more just used to it. So there's less like host stress, I guess. So anyway, I feel really good, man. And I feel like each session went as good as I could have asked for. I always have like little nitpicky things that, I should have asked that question, shouldn't have asked that question. Maybe this question went too long, this speaker went too long, or even that was good this year. They stayed pretty well within their time.
Describe the format, because not everybody knows the format either.
Okay.
So let's not take for granted that. So most of the time, what was the setup for each of the segments?
So Exiles, we discuss 4 or so topics for 3 to 4 hours. So there's 4 sessions. And add to that a pre-conference, add to that a GenZ evening the night before. But let's just the conference proper. Mm-hmm. We pick 4 topics that are, either theological in nature or cultural in nature, and we get several speakers to dive into it. So this year we did Deconstruction, Reconstruction of the Gospel. So 4 people sharing different kinds of stories of deconstruction and reconstruction. LGBTQ people in the church, what does it look like for the church to welcome and integrate LGBT people within a historic sexual ethic, women power and abuse. It's hard to have a highlight. That one was powerful, man. Very powerful. Each speaker did incredible. And then 3 Christian views on politics on Saturday. So,
in Israel and
then the pre-conference in Israel, the theology and politics of Israel-Palestine with 4 speakers, 2 on kind of, for lack of better terms, each side of that debate. That was, I would say, more intense in the classical sense of the term intense.
Yeah.
But I feel like it was the proper level of intensity while still being curious, people listening and dialoguing and finding points of overlap, exposing points of disagreement, and laying in it. But it never got awkwardly intense. I was wondering if it was going to be, if I was going to jump in and, all right, guys, settle in, but no, it was perfect. I thought, what do you think?
No, it didn't get that way. And again, even just to go down one more level. So within the 3 or 4 hours, what was happening most of the time is that each speaker would get 15 minutes to present their side or how they came to the conclusions that they've come to about the side. Then at least a couple times gave each of them a 5-minute opportunity to respond to what, after they listened to the other speakers, they could respond. And then we would take a break, and through a Slido app, people were able to put questions down, vote on the questions so that there was a prioritization of the questions they most wanted to answer. And then I like that we spent a lot more time on the couch. It seemed like,
Did it? Okay.
Yeah, it seemed like it was longer. And I thought that was good, even though you probably still got to the end feeling like we didn't get through, a bunch of the questions we wanted to. Yeah. They were able to dive deeper into the questions that got asked.
Authentic dialogue is a huge, huge value of Exiles.
Yeah.
Like I never want more than like half of what people were hearing is just a monologue.
Yeah.
Where people can be polished. They'll make points that people are like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. And so the couch dialogues and audience Q&A are a time when that speaker has to talk off script. And I sometimes I just ask, I'll try to ask a question, like clarification, or I'll try to maybe ask a pushback question or try to represent maybe a critique to what they said, even if I don't have that critique, just to make it an interesting conversation.
Well, and the point again, man, I mean, you've been criticized for platforming people with heretical views or views that are outside orthodoxy or whatever. But the whole point is actually to bring divergent views together and let them talk to each other in front of a crowd where that crowd can even then ask, questions to try to better understand why people think the way that they think. And I would say for myself, as I listened, Preston, I came away as I didn't agree with everything that was being said. Again, that's the whole point. But even in that disagreement, I found myself having to rethink and clarify why I believe what I believe about certain things. I mean, that's the whole point of it, right?
It pushes you back to the text, pushes you back to your viewpoint to say, hey, I don't think I agree with this. But then you have to go back and say, well, why? If I was on stage with this person, how would I respond to them? And how would I handle their pushback to my viewpoint? So just one of the main goals is that help us to go back and understand not just what we believe, but why we believe it. And not every session has a debatey, here. So the pre-conference, both years now are designed along those lines, different viewpoints along, hot topic. The deconstruction session, even that was just 4 different, it was more narrative driven. Like I want people to hear why people deconstruct from a traditional evangelical conservative Christian environment and then reconstruct towards something else. One was Catholic, one was more progressive Christian, one was deconstructed from kind of a white dominated evangelicalism and now is in a space where he thinks talking about race and justice is part of his evangelical faith, you know. And then a guy, Evan Wickham, who probably should have deconstructed but didn't. He had every reason to and was on that path, but then now he's more passionate about Orthodox evangelical Christianity than ever before. So so the goal there is just like, as I said in my intro, like people, I often get asked like, why do you think so many people are going Catholic or going to Orthodox? I'm like,
let's ask them.
Let's ask them. You know, let's put them on a stage, give them a microphone, and ask that question. You know, So the whole idea of platforming, I don't even think that's a verb. Is platforming a verb?
No.
But that whole thing, it just doesn't. You know, it'd be like asking a baseball player, like, you know, where's your face mask? Where's your helmet? You know, like, you're a fast runner. You're strong. You should have a football helmet on. Like, I'm not. Yeah, I'm fat. Yeah, maybe I can even play football. That's just not. It's just a weird question. It doesn't even make sense.
I mean, the concern. I think it makes sense in this sense that by giving somebody a public opportunity to further their views, you're promoting it, or you might even be endorsing it in some way. I mean, that's what the concern is. Just by very virtue of allowing them to stand up on a stage that you're supporting or sponsoring. It's implicitly saying,
right?
I'm saying you should maybe think this way too. Now, again, we just said that's not at all the point. You should think this way too.
So if people assume that that's what the conference is all about, I mean, the conference reflects the DNA of the podcast.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm having curious conversations with a diverse range of thoughtful people. It's more like conversations with your neighbor than it is with a sermon from a stage. I know many podcasts who are literally recordings of a sermon from a stage, and that's great. Like there's a place for that. But it's just not what this podcast is. Now, sometimes I'll do like direct teaching where I'll spend an hour saying, here's what I think, and here's why. I'll go through the Bible, and you know, but it's more just curious conversations. And so the conference has that kind of same DNA. I would say it even is more in some of the, I'm just thinking right now, like, the women power and abuse session, there was no like debate there. That was very much a classic, like, let's talk about this issue and let's talk about how we can do better as a church with the abuse of power towards women in the church. LGBTQ, that wasn't it's kind of a debated topic, but it was more like, how can the church welcome and receive LGBT people in the church within a historic Christian sexual ethic? Some people say it can't be done. Well, I had 4 gay and lesbian people saying, here's how it can be done, you know? So, so for instance, so the fear of platforming, if we did a session on sexual ethics, let's dive deep into what the Bible says about sexual ethics. I wouldn't have somebody who affirms same-sex marriage in that section.
Okay.
Unless it was like a debate. And that was clear that we're debating same-sex marriage, and, you know, but I'm not really interested in debating that topic at Exiles.
You know, the way I thought about it, Preston, and tell me if you think this is true. It seemed like, at least this year, that everybody that was on the stage representing still a belief in the cross of Christ, and believing in a sense that the Christianity as a priority in their life. Okay, some people were at the further edges, the outer edges of orthodoxy, and probably could even be labeled as heterodox, right? They're at the edge of that, maybe stepping across the line, a couple of them. But everybody up there is definitely representing a way of wrestling through wanting to be biblically faithful and wanting to be submitted to Christ, but it's playing itself out in different ways in their life and in different seasons of their life. That's what was represented, that I used to believe this way, things happened, and now this is where I'm at.
Really, Tim Whitaker is the only one
That's who I'm thinking about.
But even he would believe every jot and tittle of the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. So, I mean, it really comes down to marriage. And I even said from the stage, like, I think this is not a secondary issue. This is an essential part of the Christian faith, like sex difference in marriage. And he was kind of shocked at that. He's like, I didn't know. I'm like, I've said this publicly many times. Like, I don't think this is some secondary issue. So, but he wasn't talking about that.
No, that's not what he was there to talk about.
And he had 3 other people on stage that during the couch conversation, if he was trying to push a theology of affirming same-sex marriage.
No, he wasn't doing that.
He had 3 people who would have like stepped in and said, "All right, I'm gonna if you're gonna push it, I'm gonna push back on you."
Yeah.
But that wasn't the goal at all. It was like we want to hear from somebody who deconstructed in that direction. Like, why was it? I'm curious. Like, why did you go that route? And he raised many critiques of his evangelical background. Yeah. I think 90% of the people in the audience are like, hey, we're on board with these critiques.
Yes.
I don't know if I agree with where you ended up, but you're raising some good stuff. So
yeah, because he's reacting and maybe overreacting would be the critique, right? Mm-hmm. The pendulum is swinging. And again, the stuff that nobody will ever really get to hear are the hours of conversations then that we had around the picnic table and around buckets of wings. And that's where we were able to dig in more to even and try to understand, what does that really mean then, man? Like, what are you signing on for? And even, I will say this, and I don't want to skip ahead, but I told you this, I felt like Tim was continuing to be thoughtful. He was in the spirit of the entire purpose as people were challenging him. And they were saying, well, this is why I think that's actually wrong, or this is why I think the way I think. He was quiet and listening, and
genuinely listening.
Yeah, genuinely listening. He's built a brand that's representing a reaction to a particular kind of Christianity that lots of people, like you said, are saying, yeah, we've had similar experiences and we hate this. What do we do with this? He swung the pendulum in a direction, but he's still in process of trying to figure out where he's going to land on some of those things.
I've seen people who deconstruct, change their view, whatever term you want to use, and they become they almost like reflect the same black and white dogmatic militancy of the Christianity they left.
Yeah.
And I've, it's some of Tim's, and he's going to listen to this, so I'll just speak, to him, some of his like social media stuff, which I don't spend much time on social media, but when I do, and I see some of the stuff he says, I'm like, I told him this before. I'm like, dude, you sound just like the tone is like so similar to the fundamentalism that I grew up with.
You're just a reactionary fundamentalist now.
Yeah, but everybody's in person is different than their social media persona. I wish it wasn't that way. I think and some people do a good job at they are who they are, either online or offline, and I just felt like the Tim Whitaker I hung out with over the few days just was not that, he was. Yeah, he would ask, when somebody was saying, hey, I pushing back on it, he'd sit there and listen and truly genuinely process and and then he would jump in and push back all in good. Like everything was very, very
it felt that way,
friendly and engaging. And but people were, every speaker there at the conference, they got strong opinions and they're not afraid to step in and some of these conversations went past midnight.
They did, which made it just really fun, actually. Again, if you, I think, man, maybe it's a much more dangerous place to hang out in a space like that if you're not coming from a secure place in your faith and you're in a really, really vulnerable place. I could see where that could potentially be dangerous. I don't know what the right word is.
Or if your faith is so fragile that you need to protect it from any kind of resistance.
Yes.
Then that could be. Then you get scared. Like, well, no. If my foundation is my fragile foundation is attacked, or somebody raises an argument that I can't respond to, then I fear just overwhelms me. You're like, But that's just that. The problem there is not that your faith is being challenged. It's that you formed a foundation that's just so fragile that it can't face any kind of resistance. And so you hedge yourself with just people that agree with you because that's safe. And that's a dangerous place to be because you're going to
get challenged at some point. Exactly.
You have to go outside your bedroom at some point.
Yes.
And meet people who are really smart, who are going to raise some questions.
You may not want to go out of your way and travel and pay money to come to this conference right now. This may not be the best place for you to hang out at this second. Okay. Well, we talked about this, Preston. A lot of people obviously were not present for and would not have heard the recording of the pre-conference with GenZ.
Yeah.
With Ernesto Duke, Mitchell West, Street Hymns. Talk about that. Talk about the motivation for it. And let's talk about what we saw happen and even a little bit of what was talked about.
Yeah. So the very first Exiles, it's almost like a last second. We kept hearing parents are bringing their 20-year-old kid, their 18-year-old kid who, is a new Christian, a non-Christian, used to be a Christian, like, let's just get all these Gen Z kids in our living room and have them get to know each other, coming to a conference. They're probably like, am I the only 20-year-old here, and no, there's actually a few dozen of you. So
bunch, yeah.
First one was just they gathered at our house. We served them dinner, and I think I shared my testimony or something. And it was super informal, Next year, it's like we had a lot more that were coming. So we, a friend of ours has this big barn, and so we had kind of a little bit more of a formal like talk.
Yep.
Lou gave that
little band
was there. Playing music. They were like dancing and stuff, and like conversation. It was great. It was awesome. It was maybe like 50, 60 people maybe.
Yeah.
So this year we just had more local interest and more interest. So Hill City Church downtown, shout out to Hill City, said, hey, you can have our space. We'd love to host this. And we had over 250 people that showed up, man.
Packed.
It was packed, yeah. And this one of the oldest like stained glass window type cathedral kind of churches in Boise. It was a really cool space. And we had basically was a whole session. It was like a 3-hour. I opened it up. Street Hymns did I don't know what you describe it. It was like a talk with rap and spoken word scattered throughout.
Videos. I mean, it was a sensory experience.
He had a mosh pit down at the front.
It was.
He probably never seen so many white people in his life, man, in a mosh pit.
It was great. They loved him. Like they didn't know.
Loved him. He did amazing. I mean, just the talent that guy has in his little finger is more than I could ever have. But and then Ernesto Duke, president of Eternity Bible College, came and talked about like a theology of culture. The whole theme was kind of like how to reach culture with the gospel. And then there was like worship band came up. Oh, then we did we did
questions.
Deep questions. And this is where like when you allow Gen Z to ask anonymous questions that they don't raise your hand. Most of them probably wouldn't have raised that, but deep theological questions that me, Ernesto, and Street all wrestled with. I think the first one was, can women be pastors?
Pastors, predestination and free will.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first 5, I was completely overwhelmed.
Do I need to have absolute certainty with my faith? And
Yes. All right. So, but I sat in the back the whole time, and I was amazed at how focused the kids were. Like they were paying attention. And sometimes, man, again, I just think in 30 years of doing ministry to college students primarily, and sometimes doing high school ministry, there's always this tension of how much do we need to entertain? How much do we need to feed them? How much do we need to go light and then try to sneak some heaviness in, right? Totally get that tension. I very much appreciated though, unless these kids were just like super special in some kind of way. It was
they were all in
auditorium full of kids that were trying to pay attention and understand what Ernesto was taking them to some really deep places about how to minister to their friends, right? And how to think about how to bring the gospel to bear on real issues in their life. And Street through spoken word was challenging them to think differently about the kingdom and about how they think about themselves as Christians. And they were all in, man. They weren't hardly getting up for snacks or anything.
I know. No, I didn't think about that.
They did.
It's the youth pastors like all challenge is like, how can I talk meaningfully for more than 10 minutes? And they're still, and they were there for 3 hours.
I know. Ernesto was almost apologetic in his intro, recognizing everything that we just said, almost like Street was super entertaining. Now I'm going to come and I'm going to make you think. And the kids didn't budge. I got up for more trips to the snack table than they did.
I saw you playing some ping pong.
I made a couple trips to the bathroom and a couple bags of almonds I had to go get. But it was amazing, man. So again, I was just challenged to say, okay, you only get short windows with kids. Now you don't want to be boring, but man, teach them the gospel.
And even Street, as entertaining as Street was, it was so meaningful.
Yeah,
it was in-depth theology woven through it all. The kids are picking up on it,
Well, and in between his segments, he would talk a little bit.
Yeah, challenging them. I was. Gen Z is something my wife primarily arranges. Arranges? Is that right? Yeah, arranges. You say a word and you're like,
it's not the right. I don't know what you're getting ready to say, so I can't tell you if it's the right word or not.
She arranges the Gen Z night, and I kind of said, all right, what do you want me to do? So I didn't know. I almost didn't know what to expect, and it was just
huge win, man.
Huge win.
So I look forward to seeing what the next one looks like.
Pre-conference. Thoughts on the pre-conference?
Yeah. So again, the pre-conference was the discussion about Israel versus Gaza. Like, how should we think about it? Does Israel have a right to the land, a theological right to the land?
Yeah.
Right? Was sort of the umbrella under which they were all speaking.
Like, do Christians have almost like a theological obligation to support
Israel? Yeah.
That one was, I got so much good feedback from that one. I know it to me, it went as good as I think it could have gone. But even that, like, it's so complicated. And even that word, like, when people say complicated there, it's like, well, both sides are kind of like right and wrong, and you throw up your arms and like, all right, well, it's just a big mess, and I'm not going to think. I don't mean complicated in that way. I mean, there is 150-year history that is important to understand, and there's often two very different retellings to that 150-year history.
Well, could we even go broader? Because I know some people are probably thinking this. There's thousands of years of history about that land and that part of the world, and even in trying to understand what's going on in the Old Testament, the way that the land is being divided out at different points in time. And then you focus down into the last 150 years with what we understand politically has gone on there. Yeah. So you got the religious dimension, the political dimension, the empire dimension, right? And that's what makes it multi-layered and wildly complicated.
And so much, there's popular narratives that you see that 90% of people, that's all they see.
Okay.
The popular narratives. And typically in the West, the main narrative is going to be a more quote unquote pro-Israel side. And then, there's the pro-Palestinian side is often associated with people supporting terrorism, far left college students protesting, and so I will say the exposure to a thoughtful Palestinian version of the story is either highly neglected or is just dismissed. Like, they'll hear it, people will hear it with a lens of like, I know this is wrong, so I hear this stuff, I don't know how to respond, then I'm going to go cite, some article, but that's wrong because, this article from the, produced by the IDF.
I'm going to listen for how it's wrong. Yeah, rather than listen to really understand. And then it's even further complicated by having Daniel there, who's a Palestinian Christian, right?
Pacifist, yeah.
Okay. And talking about the Christian presence among the Palestinians. And, okay, so I will say this at the end of all that. I am not even going to pretend to say that I understand the politics or even the religion behind it, because there's so much to it. You can't say that after listening to a podcast or two or reading a few articles. It's too much. I think the takeaway, though, winds up being, from a Christian perspective, what do the hands and feet of Jesus look like from Israelis to Palestinians and Palestinians to Israelis? And throughout the history, they have been treacherous towards one another. And that's what started happening even amongst the speakers, is they kept citing these examples of treachery from the other side, which are completely legitimate. And my Christian takeaway is that in the name of Jesus, I have to find some other way to, whether I want to keep Israel on that land or not, or whatever my theological background is that's causing me to think that they have some special what's the word? Claim to the land. They still need to operate in a particular kind of way that's in keeping with God's law. I felt like that got, really amplified. If you really are going to operate believing that Israel should be there for godly reasons, then they have an obligation to act in a godly way.
And so how do you correlate? Like Gary kept bringing this up, like every land promise is connected with fidelity to the covenant. And the state of Israel is blatantly a secular state that is not keeping at all, trying to keep there's no fidelity there. There's a religious component population there, but that's not the state of it. It's very secular.
No, it's being used. The religious aspect is being used by secular politicians to try to bolster their claim to being righteous. And at the end of the day, when they're slaughtering each other, there's just something wrong with that in the name of Jesus. That's what I took. How do you bring peace?
Like you said, the prophets would have had something to say to end Israel, an entity called Israel, prophets would have something to say to in Israel that was bombing a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Like that would be, we have verses that kind of talk about the shedding of blood and, like and the prophets denouncing that. So anyway, my I don't want to say frustration. It's not a frustration with this. It's just a frustration with the conversation as a whole. The topic.
What was it?
Well, just you in 3 hours. It's almost like you need 10 hours. It's like 100. It's because even towards the end, when you saw like Daniel saying, well, or like Mike Cosper bring up like, well, here's this event and you have the Oslo Accords and this is what happened. And then Daniel says, no, that's not actually what happened. Here's what really happened. Yeah. And then Mike, well, yeah, but what about these 2,000-pound bombs that you just don't, if you're targeting militants in an urban setting, densely populated, you don't drop 2,000-pound bombs and level. And then he's, Mike's like, yeah, but they're dropping them from a low level. And so that's what people come up with. And so it's like, it's just like back and forth. And the person who doesn't, like I was tracking because I've done a lot of research. So when they just reference, Oslo or something, I'm like, yeah, I know what that means. I know what that means. And when you say 78% or whatever the land, like, I'm like, yes, I'm familiar with that. But the person that doesn't really know this genuine, they're just seeing a ping pong match. Like, and I hope it wasn't like throw up your arms. Oh, see, there's no way for me to figure this out. I hope it was like, oh, okay. So these two narratives, they're raising good points that seem legitimate. I can't just simply dismiss one and embrace the other one. No. I need to, if I'm really going to have a strong opinion, I need to do a little more study. So that's what I hope the takeaway was.
Here was one of the things that Cosper said that stood out to me right at the beginning of his time. He said, we live in the stories we tell. And in this case, these are profoundly contradictory stories. And they have been from both sides for centuries, for millennia. In some ways, there's contradictory stories about what's going on. So when you put these two on stage together, you wind up with two just causes in conflict with one another. And that ultimately is going to make for a tragedy. I thought that was just insightful. Again, regardless of who you think is right or wrong, they live inside of contradictory stories. And they are going to fight each other to the death because of those stories. So what was Richard's last name?
Richard Harvey. He was such a delightful person, dude. He was so good.
Yeah. So he gets to the very end, and I thought his conclusion stuck to me in the midst of just kind of getting my head spun around by listening to all of it. In that he said our goal needs to be that of peacemakers. Yeah. So instead of investing so much energy even into trying to figure out just for the common person, trying to figure out who's right to be there. How should we interpret what's coming through the news? At the end of the day, I need to think more about what does it look like to bring peace, even in the way I talk about it, like practically, how do I think like a peacemaker instead of trying to get vengeance or trying to claim righteousness versus the other side? And that stuck out to me.
Yeah. I loved his heart. I mean, all their hearts were in the right place. They're all very thoughtful, and I thought it was a perfect panel. I think the tone was great. It was a great dialogue. I guess and I'll just show my cards. And I was the neutral host referee, so I didn't, I didn't want it to be like 3-on-2 where I jump in. I want it to be genuine and really try to foster a good dialogue. Yep. In the last several months, and I've talked about this in the podcast, like I grew up with only one side of the story, very very hyper pro Israel, never questioned it, lived there for a few months, like I've been there, listened to, again, it was very the pro Israel side. Palestinians are, I still remember not hearing explicitly but feeling in my body this, like when I was there in 1999, like Israel, they were the good guys. Palestinians are the bad guys. I'll never forget. Check this out. When we went to Bethlehem, I remember seeing the sign for Bethlehem Bible College where Daniel teaches. Okay. And where I've had people on the podcast, it's a Palestinian Christian Bible college.
I didn't catch that. So he teaches over there.
Yeah, I think now it's distance because he's doing his PhD here in Indiana. But yeah, he's part of that. Huh? It's a hub of like a rich theological. I mean, all these Palestinian theologians, and they're I've read books by them now. They're just incredibly thought. There's a rich Christian tradition in the West Bank, especially. I remember seeing. I'm like, oh, there's a Bible college here in Bethlehem, And I remember, I don't know the exact wording, but somebody's, whatever, it was like, oh yeah, but it's Palestinian. Okay. It's kind of like, so it's the Christian in name, but it's not.
Yeah.
But any kind of like school in Jerusalem that was like, you know, the Israel Bible Institute or whatever, like, yeah, go stay there, you know.
Interesting.
Like, so I was like, oh, that would be cool to come to like a Bible college in Bethlehem. It's like, well, yeah, it's Palestinian, you know.
It's stained.
So I just felt like this. No one ever said Palestinians are subhuman, whatever, but that was the scent in the air of my entire upbringing whenever this conversation came up. And so that's what I brought to October 7th. But since then, I have spent more time, hundreds of hours, reading actual books by historians, Israeli and Palestinian, listening to debates with people debate, you know, get two scholars, you know, Dershowitz and Finkelstein, you know, going back and forth, you know, like listening to 30 hours of Darrell Cooper's, you know, history of Israel-Palestine, which is incredible. And just trying to get my mind around this. And I will say this is just me. This is going to make people angry. They're going to send me articles and, you know, whatever.
Okay.
When I take these two narratives, I say, okay, I'm going to test each one of these. Is it just a contradiction? You just leave it? Well, you got two sides. That's it. Whenever I do some digging and do my best to try to fact check this side of the story, that side of the story, I would say at least 8 times out of 10, the Palestinian perspective is closer, if not much closer, to the actual facts than the other side. Whenever I look at the other side, I'm like, okay, here's all these claims, and I do some digging, do some research, whatever. Even look at like Israeli scholars and stuff, and like, I'm like, well, this is just not true. The whole idea that like, you know, is that whenever they offer peace to the Palestinians, they just leave it at the table. You know, there's 5 times Mike said I've looked at all those 5 cases, and it was a sham.
Okay, like
the Palestinians are totally getting screwed. It wasn't a fair deal at all. You know, and like again, you guys can go fact check Oslo and Camp David and all these. You know. And so what do I do with that when, again, and every now and then there'll be something when I'm like, oh yeah, I think not Palestinians, but like maybe the, you know, Hamas or whatever, like making stuff up or they were lying and stuff. So I'm not saying I believe just I don't believe any of it, think face value.
Yeah.
But I think most people will believe face value anything that comes on the Israel side, and just anything that comes on Palestinian side, they just like, wow, is that true? Like, and they'll find one article that says, oh, that's a lie because of it. Oh, see, it's a lie. You know, it's like, well, you're already predisposed towards one side, like I was for 46 years of my life, you know. So, but that's just me. That's just for people. Again, but even saying that makes people upset. Go do your own research, whatever. I'm just saying this is in my, you know, research. That's where I have come. And can I say one more thing? Sorry, this is
absolutely no. Keep going.
So we mentioned that it was what's going on was determined by the international courts of justice, and most nations around the world would agree with this, that what is happening is plausibly a genocide. It's worth investigating further. There's enough evidence that we should investigate this further. We all bemoan this is going to be this isn't an exact analogy. But we all wonder, where was the German church in 1939?
Yeah.
In 1935?
Yeah.
How could they
sit back and let it happen?
And so I do at least raise the question, if it is plausibly, like, what if history does determine that this was an actual genocide? I mean, the Gaza is leveled, like it's almost uninhabitable. Like even we talk about civilian deaths and everything, but just I've looked at the satellite photos. Like it's not an article. I can look at the satellite. Like it is largely not uninhabitable. It's I've read the 84-page report that was submitted by South Africa that is here are 84 pages of reasons why this is a genocide. It's very, very horrific and compelling. And yet the majority of the Western church is on the side of Israel to where like they're not even doing enough. Make it a parking lot. You know, you hear these, you know, I at least want to raise the question, will the Western church find itself on the wrong side of a horrific historical incident where people will look back in 50 years and say, where was the church in this? Mm-hmm. Where was the West? You got Palestinian Christians being killed and Christians in the West are in support of that. Like, so something that people need to wrestle with, you know? So
Well, if that happens, we'll have our answer to how it was that the church sat by while Hitler took over. We will.
And again, I'm not making a one-to-one correlation between Hitler and Israel necessarily. No, I'm not. But there's some pretty grotesque things going on. Anyway, we got way back.
Well, and there's listen, again, we did dive into that, but there are racist impulses that are cutting in both directions that got represented from the stage. Again, I thought Casper was representing that Jewish people have been traditionally oppressed people
100%
throughout history.
100%.
And Daniel was very clear out of his own experience, and you already said it yourself, that the Palestinians have been under oppression in trying to live there. Mm-hmm. And his question even was, how long do you expect people to feel the weight of oppression before they lash back out? Oh. Okay. Then you can call that a terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. We can characterize it as a terrorist attack. But at some point when people are feeling the weight of that every day, and you're not, you can't appreciate it. If you're feeling the weight of that every day and words are not working anymore, you start burning things down, man. I mean, that's just the way it is with people, period. You start burning things down, blowing things up, killing people to try to get attention and to lash back out.
When you're 5 years old and your parents get killed and you grow up knowing like the people on the other side of the wall killed my parents.
Yes.
It's immoral for you to take up arms, but like understanding that like putting yourself in somebody else's shoes at least gives you a broader perspective on the overarching context
and where it came from.
And that happens on both sides, dude. I mean, when a Palestinian blows up a bus and takes out your grandma,
I'm going to fight back and I'm going to blow stuff back up on the other side. That's how the world operates, which again, as Christians, the point ought to be that we need to think in a transcendent kind of way. How do we rise above that and become, Richard again said this at the end, we need to become self-critical followers of the Messiah and learn how to bring together non-adversarial discourse to form a collective discourse. I thought that was interesting. How do we become better equipped to create non-adversarial discourses in the midst of everything that we just said about this, so that peace, shalom, can be brought back to bear on it? That's the kingdom ethic. Mm-hmm. And we may say, well, that's impossible. And maybe it is without an intervention by God, without God coming back and doing something dramatic. But until he does that, we're supposed to represent that in the spaces we inhabit. We're supposed to be able to talk about how to bring peace and a non-adversarial discourse to situations. Look, we don't even do that well in our own political environment. And maybe that's the extension, right? We're not equipped to figure out Gaza and Israel, but even here at home, let's see if we could practice a more non-adversarial discourse with one another with these radically opposed stories of progressivism and conservatism that are at each other's throats right now. Yeah. How do we inhabit that space as Christians?
Since 1987, One Hope has been reaching young lives for Jesus in some of the hardest areas in the world. So through print media, film, storytelling, and digital resources, One Hope partners with local Christians and local churches to take the gospel to children in countries that are either closed or hostile to Christianity. Many of these areas are facing increased violence and hostility in the face of rising political and economic strains, and the children, as you know, are often the hardest hit in these situations. One Hope partners with local Christians to bring the hope of Jesus into the midst of their circumstances where there is not much hope. The challenges are many, but God is moving and One Hope is responding. So here's what I want you to do. Two things. Number one, I invite you to check out this ministry by going to onehope.net. Look at their mission, look at their leadership, their goals, and then go to onehope.net/TITR. And please consider donating toward this ministry. One Hope has the goal of reaching 25,000 more children with the gospel. And again, these kids live in places where missionaries typically can't get into. So if you have a heart and passion to see kids in closed countries hear about Jesus, then go to onehope.net/TITR to financially partner with them today.
All right, what else? Where you want to go next?
You go, yeah. We don't need to cover every session with that kind of thoroughness. But what? Let me ask you. Okay, let's go. Let's just go to the next one. Then the deconstruction, like that. That was. I do like to push the envelope. I like to take risks. I think I will always do that. I don't want to play. This isn't a safe podcast. It's not a safe conference. I'm going to do things where I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure I'll do that again. But I'm not going to just be driven by a passion for safety and fear of somebody might, whatever. So anyway, opening up with the deconstruction talk with Tim Whitaker leading us off.
Who is
a little roll of the dice there, like people that have never been to people the first time, maybe they don't even know anything about me. Somebody took them there, and the first talk is a guy like saying all the reasons why he left evangelical Christianity.
Might challenge your program director on that. And you were the program director, aren't you? Yeah.
So. But I mean, okay. To be fair, I did have an opening talk where I tried to make it clear.
You did
what's going on, and if it was, most people there, I think they get it. They loved it. I got a lot of great feedback, but that was a little roll of the dice. What are your honest thoughts about?
Well, here's what I thought about what Tim did at the beginning that I appreciated. And again, we can judge whoever you want to judge, I guess, for the conclusions that they draw about their faith experience. But what he said at the end of his time is that the deconstruction, as he's thinking about it, is a reaction to bad theology, bad politics, and bad platformed leaders. And I wrote that down. I thought, no, that's a good summary.
He said that in his
He
talk?
did. He said that at the end of it. Bad theology, bad politics, and bad platformed leaders. And so there is there's a swelling population within the evangelicalism that we've lived in across the 50 years of our life. Mm-hmm. That has been struck with a lot of bad theology and bad politics and bad platformed leaders. And so this is a reaction against that. And again, people land in all kinds of different places. Mm-hmm. Some land way, way, way away from the faith because of that. And are very public about that and create a following for themselves around that. Some go away and then they try to come back. I felt like Evan Wickham kind of described his own journey. He didn't keep going further away. He went away, reevaluated, and then came back closer to orthodoxy, but on more of his own terms, or terms that he thought were more biblically sound. So people wind up landing in different places, but I thought that summary was a good one. Bad theology, bad politics, bad platformed leaders as they exist under the umbrella of, in this case, evangelicalism. Yeah, so I thought that was insightful.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I was just, every time my mind went to, what is a 21-year-old here who's on fire for Christ, loves their conservative church, who isn't deconstructing, come to the conference, or just anybody, like somebody who isn't quite sure what Exiles is about. Would that have been helpful? I think by the end, though, whatever disruption was happening throughout the night, because then we followed that up with Abigail, who just was brilliant. Yeah. But talking about Catholicism in a way that I was almost convinced we were going to have mass that night, because I think everybody, I think half the room was wanting to change.
She was so pleasant. I mean, some of it's just rhetorical strategy, right? She was so pleasant and inviting. You just were like, give me the Eucharist.
And the theological richness. See, this is where but again, here's the point. Protestants who just think Catholics they don't read the Bible. They just go through the motions. They have all this liturgy. It's not meaningful. You go to a Catholic church and no one's really Christian. They go and they cross and they bow the knee to Mary and to Pope and kiss the ring and stuff. And and for her to talk about the theological richness,
the substance,
the deep substance of even the iconography and the Catholic Church, and how she was more humanized as a female, even though that's all male priesthood, and explaining why that it is just, I thought it was mind blowing. And I've heard her talk about most of that before. And it was just, I want people to have an accurate view of the Catholic Church and at least appreciate why some evangelicals say, I would rather have that than this.
Drawn back to liturgy, drawn back to a tradition, a fairly stable tradition, rather than getting caught up in all the different whims of different pastors who just are strong voices, right? But are not necessarily biblical. Like there's something attractive about that. I talked to somebody that wanted to go back to an environment where there was stained glass windows and there was, what would you call it? Iconography. Yes. Just the symbols that represent different aspects of the faith that just will create a more worshipful experience for them, because Now, again, the pendulum swung so far away from the stodginess of that it's become a show almost in some places, right? An entertainment spectacle of sorts on some stages. You see them all over social media in different church environments. And people are turned off by that. They want something that's more substantive. And where do we find that? We find it back. We find it in those traditions that look and smell more Catholic. Yeah, that's what I heard. I heard her say that very well.
And I think all the speakers probably. I think when she was talking, all the speakers who are on different paths of deconstruction, reconstruction, they're all like, we appreciate like so much about what you're talking about, and some of the. Not that every evangelical environment is like this, but like some of the circus acts we see. The circus kind of like just dumbing down kind of nature of evangelicalism. There's a lot of people, especially thoughtful people, that are kind of tired of that. They're just exhausted. And so,
well, and then Amin talked about how to make sense of the fact as a Black man, African-American man living in reform spaces amongst mostly white guys, mostly white men and women. When he realized that they were not going to take as seriously some of the issues that are affecting him as a Black man in America. Mm-hmm. And just the jolt that was, again, it's not something new. It wasn't like the first time he'd ever experienced that from religious people, but it really, really bothered him that these people who are super thoughtful, who write, books and articles and do podcasts, and they think deeply about all the aspects of their faith, didn't seem to be able to do that same kind of work when it came to race or issues around the Black experience in America. And again, he's not the only voice that said that we've heard from in the last 10 years or the last 50 years. Right? Yeah, there's a whole wave. Yeah. So he wasn't trying to leave the faith. He's trying to make sense of it and reinterpret his experience of being with the people of God, because all these people that he trusted, in a sense, turned their back on him in the time that he most expected them to step up and join him in speaking out against injustice.
I feel like I was living his story when he was talking about that disorientation, that initial time when he started to express concerns over police brutality, the treatment of Black people, that oftentimes gets unnoticed. And now it's starting to pop up and it's starting to get noticed. And when he starts expressing deep resonance and concern, people were like, "You're going woke, you're going liberal." We're like, wait, what are you talking about? Like this isn't. He didn't have a category. He's like, it's out of my biblical convictions that when I see injustice, I am like concerned about that. Yeah. And now I'm being called liberal because I'm like reading Amos and Jeremiah. That's like, good. And this is disorientation. Like, what is going on here? I just felt that, man. I felt it. Obviously not. I will never be able to live his story with him, but in other ways where you just have this like this culture of biblical Christianity, and all of a sudden out of your concern for the Bible, you get passionate about something. Maybe Palestinians, or something, like it's like it's when I read the Sermon on the Mount and then I turn on the news and my heart's grieved, and like, well, no, here's what's really, it's like, well, no, like, it's because of my biblical convictions that I am concerned about this or that. And even even if somebody's maybe misguided, maybe this police shooting wasn't all, maybe there's another story here, and maybe it wasn't as bad as, but just, I don't know. We talked about, we
did it because let's just call it out. You could, the Mike Brown incident in St. Louis is often cited. And I think Amin even mentioned it this weekend. And so there's been, 10 years later, there's been documentation and deeper study that concluded that
the police saw, there's according to the DOJ report,
DOJ report
with all the witnesses. It's let's just say, without getting into it was very complex, and there could be evidence that the cop, according to the standards of policing, did not violate the standards that were placed upon him. So,
and what do we say about that, though? And you and I talked about that whether that specific incident or not turned out to be an act of injustice, he still lost his life, and there's
still lost his life.
Thousands of other ones,
and he's connected. The death of Michael Brown is connected to a larger narrative that is, at the very least, there's a symbolic power and even outrage that rightly should happen, regardless of all the details and the facts and stuff. And it does. Here's where I can imagine it would be most frustrating for someone like Amin, is that white people not all, obviously, you know, but like they might spend a good amount of energy unraveling all the facts of that incident when they haven't put the same energy in racial justice, right. Racial reconciliation in the church. It's like the only time we hear white people talk about race is like deconstructing some police shooting and trying to show the facts of why this wasn't, you know, unjust or something. So even there's a deeper, I mean, you're the expert.
I just want to say this, because this got mentioned several times too, that I thought was helpful. We want to be pro-life. And what does pro-life look like when, and again, in this case, when we're talking about police who wind up killing Black people or mistreating Black people in some kind of way? Is our first impulse to try to get the facts, or is our first impulse to grieve because we understand the larger story? Even there has been a loss of life again, from authority in a country that has not wielded that authority consistently well on behalf of Black folks. Okay. Now again, we can get it. Everybody just like, don't react to that. Can we just stand side by side and grieve with this happening? And we can get into the rightness or wrongness of this specific case. Like there's always a place for that, of course, at the end of the day, but it's tied to hundreds of years. Right.
Right there.
You said that. It's tied to a larger narrative that we have tended to ignore. And all of this is to say, so somebody like Amin, who desperately he is an Orthodox. The dude is brilliant and is Orthodox and
extremely well read. It's like, if you're like, well, let me show you the facts. You're basically saying, I mean, the optics of that, not just optics, but the hubris of that.
And he is upset and angry, and other brothers and sisters, other non-white brothers and sisters are angry about this. Yeah. And our first reaction is to diffuse the anger. Our first reaction is to bring a theological argument or to bring the facts of the case as they were finally reported from one side or the other. Instead of, our first impulse needs to be to stand, to be peacemakers. Again, let's go back to what does it look like to be a peacemaker, to be an empathizer, to be somebody that can feel what it feels like to walk in your shoes, which is something that Max Lucado said on our way out the door yesterday. And when I do that, that's going to create a different posture. Creates a different posture. Yeah. If that posture was the norm, guys like Amin would not be using deconstruction language or having to try to figure out where it is that they align themselves within this evangelical movement. They wouldn't have to do that if the first impulse was to stand together in the midst of loss of life.
That's it.
Should we do that? That's the trouble.
We can get bogged out of that. Let's move to the next day. And again, we don't need to hit every. So next day was women, power, and abuse in the morning. I feel like that was maybe my favorite flow. And I even said, and this is how I arranged it, we're gonna go on a journey of Sandy Richter kicking us off with what does the Bible say about women, the humanization of women, and how that stands out in its ancient context.
That's excellent.
And that laid the foundation. Then we had Lori Krieg sharing her story of abuse and how the church mishandled that and said it was her fault and stuff. And I was
gut-wrenching, man.
Wrecked. And she's a good friend. I know I've never heard her the A to Z tell it. I don't think she's told it on stage before. Wrecked. And then Tiffany coming out. Obviously a preacher.
Yeah.
I mean, she lit that room on fire. I mean, she was such a great communicator. And then Julie bringing us back to just like, all right, what is healing?
How do you heal?
Let's move forward. Let's not just deconstruct. Let's not just complain. Let's not just identify the evil and the problems, but how do we move forward? And with such a gentle, like just seasoned spirit. Like, so I just thought that progression. Would you agree?
Yeah. I don't totally. No, I said it.
I sat back like this worked out exactly.
I was like that was brilliant. And even the demeanor and posture of each of the speakers, which again, you can't always predict this. The words that they used, the vibe they had on the stage, the way they presented themselves, it really took you on a journey. Yeah. And I appreciated, Lori told her story, and it was just gut wrenching and just wrong on so many levels. What happened to her. And sobering as I think about my own responses to stories that I've heard or to, as I listen to other men talk about stories of women complaining, and I put that in air quotes, about their mistreatment all the way up to just literal abuse, physical, sexual abuse. it had me rethinking that. And then Tiffany got up, and basically what I heard her saying was, men, grow up. Okay. If the shoes fit, wear them. Again, it doesn't mean all men are a certain way. It doesn't mean that none of us are mature in the way we interact with women. It just says on your watch, grow up and help the other guys that you're with to grow up in terms of how they not only view women, but how they support them, how they help them to utilize their gifts within the body. Come on, man. Like that's what I heard. Like, again, she triggered me a couple of times with some of the things that she said, but at the end of the day, good. I need to hear that. I need to be pushed around a little bit on that. That
was one where I wish the Q&A time had so much more I wanted to get into.
Same.
Here's I would love your thoughts on this. I brought up the question during the Q&A. What about the men who are genuinely falsely accused?
Yeah.
Is that something we should be concerned about? And then Tiffany, and I think there was mixed response, kind of like, I think Julie said, absolutely. Like I know people, because I know a few friends of mine who have not just based on their test, but like having looked at the whole situation, I'm like, I think they were totally wronged here. I think they were falsely accused of either abuse of power or not the ones I'm thinking of was not a physical or sexual abuse accusation. It was more abuse of power or being too kind of maybe chummy with a woman when there was zero intention. It was stuff that the anti-Billy Graham rule people say you should be doing.
Yeah.
And all right, I'm going to do that. And then they get accused. And it's like, it's kind of, so, but then Tiffany said it's less than 1%. And I don't have data to verify that or back it up. I did talk to a pastor in the break who came up and said, hey, I just got to say, man, this doesn't seem right. He's like, I'm a pastor. I've been falsely accused, and it was a horrific experience. And I have several pastor friends who have all had the same experience. I can't verify him nor his friends or whatever, but he was like, it just feels like it has to be more than 1%. I said, look, I would need to do a deep dive. I don't know what the data is out there and everything. So I don't, so what were your thoughts on that? I mean, we can't prove or disprove that. But just anecdotally, and it's hard as a guy who I'm trying to not be the kind of guy I've been for most of my Christian life, where I didn't listen to women, where I didn't care about this conversation. I confessed my sin at the beginning of the session. So I'm trying so hard not to be that guy. But what do I do with these? Yeah.
Well, what is the question? I mean, ultimately, does that ever happen? I also have examples. I am a guy. I am predisposed to be partial to men. Okay. I'm predisposed to want to side with men. It just, and again, that sounds terrible to say, but
you would say that that's true of any man or woman, right?
Yes.
They're predisposed to side with.
Yes. Yeah. That's really what I'm saying. So I just need to check that. Here's what, again, in 30 plus years of doing ministry in the church and in parachurch organizations, which is more likely that a man has abused his power in the direction of a woman in some way, shape, or form?
No,
you already know where this is going.
Yeah, of course,
right?
that's going to be.
I have so many more examples, both from my own poor choices, my own things coming out of my mouth that shouldn't have, and watching what happens with my colleagues and other men who maybe aren't even thinking or paying as close of attention to this. That's another thing that I just heard them say. Like, men, you just need to start becoming aware of what it means to have a woman in the room. Start becoming aware of what her experience might be like when she is one, or there's two women in a room full of 10 men or something, that's usually what the case is.
Yes. Even in egalitarian circles.
Yes. Would you just pay attention more? So here's the conundrum though, Preston, that I think is actually more challenging. You actually brought up a situation that happened when we all went out to dinner, and Abby was with us. And there was a bunch of other guys, and we were
strong voices, strong opinions.
We were going at it with each other in the best of ways, right? And just voices flying, it's getting loud, thoroughly enjoying it. And Abby hadn't said anything. Abby's temperament and personality seemed to be way more chill.
I think she was enjoying her beer, actually.
I think she was just chill. She was cool. She was cool. But it went through me too, because she was sitting right across from me. She started to try to say something at one point.
Did she? Okay.
Yeah, she actually did before you jumped in with this. And it got smothered, okay, again, because it was just, it was like being at a family dinner table and the loudest voices and the people that were most assertive were the ones that were getting to talk the most. And at one point you said, Abby, you kind of stopped everybody and said, Abby, what do you think about this? Fully realizing Abby is arguably...
She's the only female there.
And she's also the smartest person at the table.
By far.
Okay? And so we haven't heard from her, nor have we tried to get anything from her. But here was the conundrum that you guys even talked about on the panel. Was that the right thing to do, in a sense, to stop things to make a space for her to get in? Or can that be interpreted as being patronizing? Where she's not strong enough to get in, so I'm going to have to help her. Or, hey, guys, we have to calm this down so that the girl in our midst can get in, right? We talked about that a little bit.
That was,
And so you end up, as a guy, can be thinking, oh, I don't know what to do because I'm going to love no matter what I do. That is definitely a mentality that can be taken. I actually haven't thought about it. What are your thoughts?
I love that we talked about that on the panel.
So do I.
I brought up the next day so that was the night before. Then the next day was women power and abuse. And on the panel, I said, all right, this happened like 12 hours ago. I, noticed that she wasn't speaking. Was it okay to ask her, and I love what, I think it was Sandy or Julie said, that's fantastic. Just don't make it like, hey, Abby, give us your female person. Like, don't. It's not because she's a female.
Good.
Like, don't make it like we're gonna make room for the female. Just make it about her intelligence. Like, that'd be brilliant. Like, would you have any thoughts here? Would love to give you space if you have something. You want to jump in. So yeah, it seems like that was the majority. Tiffany did have a concern. What was her concern?
I'm trying to remember because she did push back on it a little bit. Look.
I forgot what she said, but but then even then I was like, okay, so I got kind of handcuffed a little bit. Like, so there's a good way to do it and not a good way. And I think if guys just ask that question though, what can I do? I think that is at least a step in the right direction. Like being aware there's all these loud male voices. We do. And everybody there would want, like, none of it was intentional. They were all, half of them are egalitarians.
That's just the way the game was unfolding.
Yeah. And this is where my concern is. It's not with the true blue narcissists, the ones who want to abuse power. It's good men doing things unintentionally. Yeah, which I think everyone at that table would fit that description.
Good. So I wind up saying, I want my posture to be, even if there's a dude at the table that's not making his way into I should be sensitive. Again, it's a posture that says I'm going to agape. Can we just talk about like just basic Christianity? Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to do what's best for somebody else in spite of what it costs me. Mm-hmm. And maybe what I need to do is just be aware of what's happening with the dynamic of the group. If there's a woman, it's also recognizing that there is a unique. There is. No, go ahead.
Well, just even a dude, I still want to say if there is 6 dudes and then a 7th dude who's more quiet, introverted, I still think, right? Questioned everything now.
No, keep going.
It still is a different dynamic than 6 dudes and a female.
Yes, that's what I was just about to say. There's just a heightened sense, again, because of history, because of gender dynamics, because of everything that they talked about actually the other day, that men tend to already devalue women in those spaces. In Christian circles, they've got all kinds of theological reasons that justify them feeling like the woman's voice is not as important. Okay, and that's the history that we were confronting and those women were confronting. Yeah. So be aware. Yeah. Just be aware. And if you mess up and it hurts her feelings, whatever your decision was, guess what you can do next? Apologize. I am deeply sorry. Yeah. Yes. Help me do better. Yeah. Help me do. Okay. So that's a very different posture than ignoring, completely unaware, getting defensive when it gets brought up, when a woman brings something up, getting immediately defensive. That's what I felt like they were confronting.
I got a question for you. Something was brought up. I think it was Tiffany that and this is directed towards you, Ed Uszynski. Yeah. She said, even things like height, voice, can carry a certain power dynamic that can be intimidating. So my buddy Ed here is 6'4". You can bench 300 pounds.
Those are exaggerations, man.
You're 6'4".
But I'm beefy.
Yeah,
I'm beefy.
How much can you put up, man? What do you rep? You're repping 225.
I'm not bench press. I'm 56 years old.
Ed's a tall, big, strong dude. You have a Theo Bro accent tone, even though you're not. He's not. Okay, I know.
I look military. Everybody always thinks I'm in the military.
Yeah, ex-KKK. No. Like you have all of that, and you have a strong voice. You're opinionated. You don't mind. So you carry all of these things that is just who you are.
Yeah.
You can't shrink yourself. You can't like change your voice tone, or say you are you, and you're creating God's image. So how did you feel when even like, you know, some of the, even the physical stuff with the guys can carry this power dynamic? So like, I think that's true, but like, also, is it just being aware that when you walk into a room and everybody else is a lot smaller than you and doesn't have as loud of a voice and maybe isn't as smart, that what do you do? Do you just like, is it just being aware of like, you can easily overpower that room, so maybe pull back a little bit? Or
come on, man. This happens. I talk about this in the context of marriage all the time with my wife, Amy, who's a very secure, athletic, tall woman, right? Like has a lot of those attributes that also has a commanding presence of sorts. And this has happened. It happened a ton in our first 5 years of marriage that I would be, just being me in the way I talk and in the way my body is. And she would wind up crying. Okay. And I'd get into her. They're like, what are you upset about? She said, well, you're yelling at me. You're getting aggressive. And I'm like, I'm really not. I'm just being me, basically. Right. And then I'd go away, you know, and before the Lord, as I'm storming out of the room or whatever, cause I'm really upset now, I'd say, God, this is just the way you made me. You know, I just need to be me. And God would say, yes, it is just the way you are. And the way you are scares the kids and makes your wife cry. So to be able to do this differently, I'm not going to change, you know, the overall persona that I am. But you just said it, Preston. I'm going to be aware because I love her. Mm-hmm. And again, if I'm in a room full of colleagues, I need to love them by being aware of what this kind of presence does. Yeah. Change my body language. Make sure that I'm keeping my voice down. Make sure I'm not try not to escalate, or if I catch myself escalating, apologize right away. Man, I'm getting loud right now. I'm sorry for that. I'm really not meaning. Can I start over again? Did I hurt your feelings? It's paying attention to the effect that you're having on somebody in the room, which again, that's a different, if everybody was doing that consistently, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. The problem is because we don't do that. We're not aware of our effect. We're not aware of our silences sometimes, even when they need a voice to step up. Right. I've had plenty of women say, I needed another man to stand up and say something in this moment. I shouldn't have had to have been the one to say this all the time. Like, when is somebody else going to say that's not right? You know, the way that guy's talking to me, or ignoring this women's issue that we're dealing with within our ministry. Somebody else needs to stand up with me.
I have a story that I have never told anybody.
Oh, is this a good time? Is this a good time to get it out to thousands of people at once?
And then we are going to need to. We should wrap it up after this. Yeah. Well, it's not a big deal. It's kind of along those lines. Like I'm not, you know, I'm an average size person. I don't have the domineering voice, I don't think, you know, like, so maybe different, but like with my wife and I'm very super analytical, right? Fact based. So whenever there's like a dispute or anything, I used to say, until my counselor told me, don't ever say that word ever again. I would say, give me the facts. Give me the facts of what happened. I would always do that. Like, just give me the facts. I'll add up the facts and I'll figure this out.
How'd that go?
2 + 2.
Yeah, you had to pay.
You know how it went.
You had to pay to get the advice not to do that. All right. Yeah. Keep going. And why? Why should you not do that?
It's that you're just trying to fix something and not understand how a situation is making a person feel. And how a situation is making a person feel is just as important, if not more important, than collecting all the data and spitting out the right answer. So I have to bite my. So maybe the power I bring is that kind of analytical. Like, I can come in and assess, and all right, I'm gonna have my little clipboard and like, you know, like, all right, we'll add it all up, and then I'll say, well, no, you shouldn't feel that way because I've added up the facts and they don't match up to your feelings. So. You know, I've never actually said those words, but I've almost said those words.
All right, dude. So that's a marriage conference, right? But we've also had this talk in the context of race.
Yep. Yes, 100%.
We just did it again
100%.
a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It's not
LGBTQ. We didn't go there.
I was going to say, like you build a whole ministry around calling us as Christian men and women to take a different posture towards people that are same-sex attracted, that are experiencing homosexuality. Take a different posture, man. Yes, there's a time for the facts. Absolutely. Like we're not, eschewing argument, or there's a right or a wrong at the end of the day. Like I'm tired of hearing that too, that this idea of being empathetic or really trying to understand first what it feels like to be you, that's somehow like a compromise, an unholy compromise to do that when it seems like that is the Jesus way. Like that's what I thought I got called to when I came into Christianity 30 some years ago. So it shouldn't have to be that daggone complicated, man. Yeah. Really, it shouldn't. If we would love each other well, and this is what love looks like. It looks like maybe I don't wear tight T-shirts all the time when I come into
really?
Yeah, I think about all that stuff because I've gotten that kind of negative feedback. Exactly. You and I have never even talked about that, the way you just described me. Yeah, I've had all kinds of negative feedback because of how I am. So I can get defensive and curl up in a ball and pout about that. Or I can say, Lord, how do you transform who I am so that it can become something redemptive for people, that I can use the power I have to actually help people instead of being a threat to them in some way. That's just big boy, big girl talk right there, that's right? Good. That's just good. Growing up.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't even announce. So Exiles, we announced
it's a big one here.
Yeah. Exiles in Denver. We're doing a 2-day Exiles conference in Denver, October 4th and 5th. We got a great lineup. It's a shorter, so 2-day conference. So you can, if you're not in Denver, you can fly in, fly out. You can fly in, Friday, be home before Saturday night, so you can be at church on Sunday.
I just get used to all the restaurants in Boise. I got a great YMCA here, and now we're gonna go to Denver.
I know. We got Russell Moore, Derwin Gray, Caitlin Chess, Christine Emba,
Tony
Scarcello, Rachel Joy Welcher. So we're talking about discipleship in the election year. We're talking about sexuality post purity culture.
Come on.
So we've obviously, deconstructed purity culture like crazy. At least my context. It's like, okay, what does healthy sexuality look like? Do we even talk about things like sexual purity, or is that word purity gone from the Christian vocabulary? So we'll talk about that. And then I think the final session might have on paper the least sex appeal, I think, maybe. Okay. But fake news, propaganda, and healthy media consumption. I honestly think this is one of the most important. It's getting at the source of all of the problems that we're having in the church.
So many of them. Yeah.
This person's drinking, Fox News all day. This person's drinking CNN. This person, they're like, our hearts are so radically shaped by the things that we're listening to. So what does a healthy media consumption look like? So Patrick Miller, Jay Kim are going to talk about that. So anyway, theologyandraw.com, you can check out the details. It's all open now. There's an early bird registration. So you will, I think that one's, because it's more centrally located, I think there's going to be a huge greater Denver, Colorado Springs contingency there.
Yeah.
A lot of people that always say like Boise's too hard to get to, Denver's much easier to get to. So I think it's going to sell out pretty quick. So
yeah, you want to get in on that. That's good, especially the timing of it when it's happening. We'll be right in the throes
a month before the election
of the political heat.
That's going to be a good one. I said Russell Moore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey man, proud of you for pulling off a third one. Seriously, I just felt like people were blessed again. I heard so many conversations. I love seeing the buzz out in the lobby. And again, people are just trying to figure out how to love better, to think more deeply, to love each other better. Like I really sense that happen again. So, got to do what he wants to do in people's lives with it. But I appreciate you trying to make it happen.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the podcast. We'll see you next time.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.